Well, it is time to get going. We are talking today about Christological controversies. And so I know that's quite the mouthful there. Flipping your back to some of those terms and vocabs that we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about briefly, it's important, but not going to be a major thing to talk about. I dropped it. Is talking about monasticism. And so when we think about monasticism, what that is it's a peculiar way of life. When you think about different religious groups, you may think about monks and nuns and all of that. That's monasticism. And so we're going to talk about the rise of that. Monasticism has some certain characteristics, a couple of different types of monasticism. That's going to have a big push and a big emphasis in this time period we're talking about today and the 5th century, 400s or so, and then going forward. It's going to become a really big part of Christianity moving forward. I think when just kind of historical note, in England, when the English church separates from the Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation and all of that, you got the Anglicans. Part of what they do is they dissolve a lot of the Catholic monasteries that are throughout England, and something like 800 monasteries are removed. It's some wild number like that. Anyway, monasticism is... think monks and nuns. We'll talk about asceticism. We may have talked about this some previously. Talk about it a little bit today. Asceticism is just a lifestyle of self-denial. And so there's Gnostics are big on asceticism. Monks are big on asceticism. It's the idea of denying the body for spiritual gain type thing. We're talking today a lot about Christology, as obviously is in the title. Christology is the study of Christ. Ology is study. Christ, obviously, there in the center. And so when we talk about Christology, particularly we're talking about largely, especially today, things to do with the humanity and deity of Jesus. And so what's the nature of the humanity and deity? Is he fully human? Is he fully divine? Is he something in between? What's going on there? What does it mean to be incarnate? Those type things. So Christology is what we're talking largely about today. A couple terms we'll use. One is the term monophysitism. Mono being one. Physite, you might see like the word physical there. The idea of one nature is the idea here. And so Christ has, those who say monophysitism is true, Christ has one nature. And so he's fully divine, fully human, he's one or the other. And so that's going to be a big topic of discussion today. Opposite to monophysitism is diphysitism, and that di you might see as like a two, and so Christ has two natures, and this is the position that's going to win the day and be the orthodox position, especially when we're wrapping up today talking about the Council of Chalcedon. Then the term Christotokos or Christokos and Theotokos. You have the word Christ there, and tokos is kind of the word to bear, like to give birth. And so there's going to be some debate about what do we think about Mary in this time period? Is she the bearer of Christ in that she only gave birth to Christ? She gave birth to the human nature child, or did she give birth to the God child, Theotokos? Did she give birth to, is she the God bearer? Was the child in her womb fully God? And if so, was she giving birth to God? And so there's going to be some confusion there, and some strong usage of these terminology is going to make a big difference. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about church sees, S-E-E. That word is not like I see you. It's the idea of like an episcopal see is a seat from which a bishop or some other church official is going to rule. And so if you're, it's going to be like a position of religious power. And so we're going to talk about 5 big episcopal sees in today. So let's get into it, and let's talk about monasticism. Let's go over here. There we go. So monasticism is going to develop. This time period is going to be very, very formative for the church going forward. So last week we wrapped up with the 4th century. We talked about some of those church councils and things. This week we're going to be largely talking about the 5th century, so the 400s. Did I get that right? Yeah, I don't know. We'll be talking about the 400s largely. The 400s is the 5th century, yes. I always get that confused. But in this time period, there's going to be some big changes that are going to be happening in the church. The church is going to come out of this time period really differently than it was before. And a big part of that is the development of monasticism. So what is monasticism? Why is it a thing? When we think about it, we think about nuns and monks, and we think of maybe recluses and those sorts of things. Well, in this time period, there's a couple reasons why this really took hold. We'll talk more about what it looks like here in a minute, but one big reason is there's some discontentment after persecution of how do I really demonstrate my faith? It's persecution is a very hard thing to go through. It's not something that you should probably be seeking and enjoying. But one thing that it really does is it's a crucible for your faith. And so in the absence of national worldwide persecution, like we saw with Diocletian and some of those other guys, now there's this kind of vacuum of, well, how do we in a time of peace really demonstrate our severe loyalty like the generations before us have? And so part of that is going to be, well, let's embrace some things and put some restrictions upon ourselves to really demonstrate our faith. And so monasticism is going to be one way to do that. It's going to be a way to show commitment when the world around has become spiritually lax. One big issue is, as the church has kind of settled in now, we're several centuries removed from Christ, and we're centuries removed from that initial first push of the apostles. People have become complacent. People have become comfortable. And for a while, there was that struggle of how do we, as Christians, live in this world when we're expecting Jesus to come back any minute now? Well, now there's been some transition to, well, he's not come back yet, and he may not come back in my lifetime. So I need to figure out how to live in this world as a Christian. And so some have become spiritually lax. That initial fire that's put under them has kind of cooled, and so they've become complacent and become conformed to the worlds that they live in. And so in refutation of that, some cling to monasticism. And then some will go to... cling to it just as I'm a Christian above and beyond the call of duty. I'm being extra faithful type thing. And so some want to be just a part of a different community, a different spiritual community. They may not like the church that they've been a part of, and they want something different. And so they see a cohesive group of people that are hyper dedicated, and they see that, and it looks appealing to them. And so they go and join these monastic communities. So there's various reasons why people would choose to become monks and pursue monasticism. So what is monasticism actually like? What are the things that they do and make them distinct from just your everyday Christians? Well, monasticism, especially early on, is very heavily influenced by military imagery. You get a little bit of this in the Gospels, in the Bible. You have Paul talking about putting on the full armor of God and those sorts of things. We war against spiritual entities and all of that in Ephesians. And so monasticism is going to have a big, strong, we're soldiers for Christ push. Some are going to see that as spiritual and take it that way. That's going to be the majority, but not everybody. There's going to be some some monks and some monastics that really say, let's pick up arms and let's go and destroy the pagan temples around us, and they resort to violence because they're the soldiers of God. And so that's going to be one defining feature. Another is martyrdom. Martyrdom has fallen out of prevalence. It's not that common anymore. And so, the martyrs are those who gave their life for Christ. In a world where I can't just go be martyred for my faith in the same way that people had been in the past, well, how do I give my life for Christ? Well, I'm going to commit myself to monasticism, and I'm going to live a hyper-dedicated life and essentially die to myself. I'm leaving behind all the things that I grew up with and, family relationships and, my hometown at times, and I'm going to go live in a secluded community and die to myself and, be a martyr in a sense. Fighting against the demonic. There's a lot of talk about demonic forces in the early church. And typically they're seen as external, forces that work upon you. Some early Christians talk about it. I think it might be Athanasius. I might be wrong on that. But he talks about it as the demons are your temptations, not just those that cause you to be tempted, but your temptations themselves. And so there's going to be a lot of talk about fighting against the demonic in these groups. There's going to be an embrace of the angelic. And so as we fight against the demonic, we embrace the angelic. And so kind of create a heaven on earth type thought here of, we're going to live hyper-spiritual lives, and we're going to live as if, God's already come back and we've already united. And so we're going to be, secluded in a community of people that are heavily focused on God. There's going to be a big push for knowledge, and monasteries are going to be for the next hundreds and 1,000 years. They're going to be a major repository of knowledge, a major place of learning. And so there's going to be a big push for intellectual knowledge of God and contemplation and prayer. And those are going to be a big key defining characteristic of monasteries. And then a lot of talk about philosophy. And so about, this is how we ought to live and how life should be carried out and those sorts of things. And so as monasticism begins to develop, there's really two different branches. There's the first is called Hermetic monasticism. And that word Hermetic kind of looks like the word hermit because they both come from the same Greek word, which means wilderness or desert perhaps. And so these are the types of monks that you think of when you think of, that guy that wanders around in the wilderness all by himself, almost like a John the Baptist-ish type thing, although John the Baptist drew big crowds to himself and was not a hermit. And so these would be very ascetic. Living difficult lives, denying themselves lots of creature comforts. Many would take vows of eating just the bare minimum to survive, secluding themselves from the world. Going off and living in a cave out in the woods or in the desert side. And some might have a very small groups, a pair here and there, or maybe a very small group, but it's not a community like we sometimes think of. These are pretty seclusionary type monks. And so one good example of this is a guy by the name of Anthony of Egypt. He was 250 to 356 are his dates. Athanasius writes a book called The Life of Anthony, which really praises Anthony for his, piety and his holiness and the life that he lives. Anthony, though, says that this is not original to me. This is something that I got from somebody else. And so that shows you that this type of monasticism is pretty early, right? We're talking 400s, 500s, or 400s really for this class period. But 200s, maybe even earlier than that. You already have some that are being discontent with the way Christianity is going and deciding, I'm just going to go be a hermit and go practice my faith with rigor out in the wilderness by myself. A very interesting example, there's a guy named Simon Stylite, 390, 495, or 459 or so. This is a depiction of him. You can see he is standing or sitting on a pole. And this was pretty common, actually. So one thing that they would do is they would go and erect a pillar, essentially. And they'd go sit on top of that pillar for the rest of their lives. And they would be, they would require other people bring them food. Maybe they just don't go without food today. No shelter. This is the kind of extreme asceticism that they're doing. I'm going to go sit on a pillar for the rest of my life type thing. And so you can see, some presumably Christians going up to him and, seeking wisdom from him or whatever that might be, providing him his basic necessities and whatnot. But that's some serious dedication to say, I'm going to deny all the things that I have in my life, and I'm going to go sit on a pillar for the rest of my life, or for a period of time, perhaps. But that's the kind of monasticism that is pretty popular. Although a much more popular version, and the version that's really going to be the one to take hold, is what's called Cenobitic monasticism. And it doesn't look anything like it really, but it comes from two Greek words, koine or koinonia, which is community, fellowship, and then the word bios, life. And so it got from Greek to French to English, and so it kind of looks weird. But that's the idea of a shared common life, monasticism. And when we think about monasticism, this is typically what you think about, or at least what I think about. You think about the monasteries and the monks and the nuns that are gathered together, and they go throughout their days doing whatever it is that they do. And this is the type that's really going to gain popularity, and it's going to gain significant popularity throughout the world, not just in pockets, but really worldwide, especially perhaps even in Europe. And so this is the form that has monks and nuns, and they're not wandering like many of the heretic monks might be, but they are tied to a location. They're tied to the monastery. And one very significant figure when we talk about this type of monasticism is a guy by the name of Basil of Caesarea, 330 to 379. He is one of the Cappadocian fathers who we've talked a little bit about. Very significant writings that he produces on the thought of Christianity in this time period. But one of the things that he really promotes is that these monks that have secluded themselves and joined these communities, they really ought to be serving the people around them. And they really ought to be about doing good in their communities. And so he's going to have a very service-oriented type of monasticism. He is also going to, along with his sister, advocate for what's called double monasteries, which are, co-ed monasteries, I guess. Maybe not co-ed exactly, but, monasteries that are for men and women. And so there's going to be both monks and nuns. And this type of monasticism still practiced today. We still see a lot of monks and nuns that hail Basil as a hero and really the founder of what they practice in a lot of ways. He did have some opposition in his views of what these monasteries and monks should be doing. His main adversary is going to come after his time a good bit and after what we're talking about today. But a guy by the name of Benedict of Nursia. You've probably heard of Benedictine monks, or may have heard of that term at least. Well, that comes from this guy. He creates what it's called the Benedict's Rule, which it sets really standards of practice for how these monasteries ought to run. And so for Benedictine monks, their type of monasticism is very isolated. We're not about getting out in the communities and serving people. We're just going to hole up in our monasteries and be isolated from the outside world. Practice our religion in private, and the world is wicked, and those sorts of ideas. It's going to be very, very regimented. We wake up, we say our prayers at this time, and we go through our day, and we have a very scheduled life. And the regiments are very strict. I think there's 8 prayers a day that they're required to do. There's so much time of Bible study every single day that they're supposed to do, and they're going to be very well educated, though. A big part of being a Benedictine monk is study and literacy and learning. And so, as a result, monasteries are going to become a hugely influential, important place of learning throughout the rest of the world. Literacy is not always common, and there's pockets of time where literacy is more common than others. When we get to the Dark Ages, that literacy rate's going to kind of plummet. But these monasteries are going to have incredibly well-educated people that speak multiple languages and study, the Greek and sometimes the Hebrew, although that's much less common, Greek and Latin, and be very well-educated in reading the church fathers. They're going to be very significant in preserving the writings of the church fathers and the scriptures themselves. This is the oldest continually inhabited monastery in the world. This is the St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, Egypt. It's right at the base of the historic site of Mount Sinai. And also, it was originally a site was constructed there by Constantine's mother, Helena, around the traditional site of the Moses, where he talked to the burning bush. They constructed a church building around it. Whether it was or not, probably not. But anyway, they construct a monastery, and this has been inhabited for essentially from the time we're talking about then to today. People are still living here. It's incredibly important because in the 1800s, a guy by the name of Constantine von Tischendorf, which is the greatest name of all time, he is going to come here on a expedition to see what all's in here. And there's all kinds of relics and important, all kinds of writings. And he is going to find Codex Sinaiticus, which we looked at a little bit after our class period last week, after we turned the camera off. But the Codex Sinaiticus is the oldest, at least one of the oldest, fully preserved Bibles that we have. It's incredibly old. It dates back to the time period we're talking about today. And Tischendorf finds that manuscript just in this cathedral. Legend says that they were about to burn it. Probably not. But anyway, he liberates it. He steals it. And the rest is history. But this is going to be a really important place. This is a place that, up 200 years ago has manuscripts that date back to the 4th century. Now, that's incredibly old. That's incredibly important. And so monasteries are significant, and they were back then, and they still are today for a lot of reasons. On to the things that are more important and that are going to take up the bulk of our time today. This is a map of the Roman provinces. We talked a little bit about how Diocletian splits the empire into an East and West empire and all that. That fades away with Emperor Constantine, but really that division of East and West is going to still remain, even though it may be united under a single ruler. What we're going to talk about today with these Christological controversies, they're going to involve the church throughout the whole world. Rome is going to be involved in this. The European church is going to be involved, but largely it's going to be this Eastern church that's going to be really the root of a lot of these discussions. And as we go on, there's going to be divisions, and cracks in the church between the East and the West. And we'll talk more about this at the very end. But one of the big reasons for that is the distance between significant churches. So if you look at the map, I don't know if it'll show up online, but yeah, it'll show up on the TV. So you have here the church at Constantinople, right there at the base of the Black Sea. When Constantine becomes emperor, he moves the capital city of the empire, the Roman Empire, from Rome to Constantinople, to Byzantium, renames it Constantinople. Eventually, it's going to be renamed Istanbul. But that is going to be a highly significant church. It's going to be the second most important church in all of Christianity. Then you're going to have the church at Antioch, which is significant all the way back from Paul's day, right? That is going to be a very significant church. We're going to talk a lot about the Antioch church today. You're going to have the church at Jerusalem, going to be very, very significant. Obviously goes all the way back to, Peter, day of Pentecost. The church of Alexandria there in Egypt, that's going to be a very significant church. These are 4 of the 5 most significant churches. The other is all the way over here, down in Rome, or up in Rome. That's a really far distance. That's a whole Mediterranean Sea difference. If you want to travel by land from Rome, you got to go up all the way through Italy. You got to go all the way down, and that's a really long land route. The ocean would be the fastest, but even that, the Mediterranean Sea is enormous. And so Rome is going to be isolated in a lot of ways from this other side of the world, essentially. The Roman Church and the Western Empire, they're going to begin to speak Latin predominantly. There's going to be a shift. We talked about that a little bit with Tertullian, the father of the Latin Church. There's going to be a big shift. They're going to start speaking Latin over there, whereas the Eastern Empire is going to remain speaking primarily Greek. And so there's going to be all sorts of cracks that begin to emerge. But with this, though, we're going to see these Christological controversies. They're going to involve Rome, but they're primarily going to be over in the eastern side of the world. Just to kind of recap what we talked about last week, the Council of Nicaea in 325. If you remember, there was the Arian controversy. Arius was saying that Jesus was of a lesser nature than the God the Father. The Son was lesser. He was subordinate to the Father. And the Council of Nicaea says, nope, that's not the case. God is one. The Son is of the same nature, the same substance as God the Father. And for that matter, the Holy Spirit. Although it didn't much expound on the Holy Spirit, it just kind of tacked it on there at the end. And so the term that they come up with is the term homoousios, which is of same substance. And that's a very significant term. Well, there was some disgruntled Christians, I guess, after Nicaea and about the term homoousia. And so then you have some groups that are really trying to talk about there's a door open to modalism and these sorts of things. And so then you have the Council of Constantinople, which says, okay, God is not just one, but he's also 3. And it really embellishes and talks a lot about more the Holy Spirit. And so you have God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're all 3 God. They're none of the 3 are the same exactly, but they're all the Trinity. And so that's going to be the kind of conclusion. Well, there's still going to be more questions. What is the deal with Jesus, though? God the Father, I get him. I get the Holy Spirit. He's proceeds from the Father. He does the Father's will and those sorts of things. There's going to be questions about whether he proceeds from the Son. We'll talk more about that in a couple weeks. But then now there's questions about, well, what about Christ? What about Jesus? So the Council of Ephesus is going to emphasize the oneness of Jesus. He is not two separate beings. It's not a human Jesus and a divine Jesus. There's unity there. They're not two separate things. They're one. Then it's going to swing the polar opposite, and there's going to be some people that say, well, there's just the divine Jesus. And so the Council of Chalcedon, which we're going to end with today, is going to emphasize the two-ness of Jesus. He's both fully human and fully divine. And so those are distinct but incredibly important. There's a unity there. He's both. Let's start by talking about just kind of the basis. Christians are really struggling to understand the Trinity, and I don't think that's ever changed. It is something that, quite frankly, when we get to Chalcedon, I think they make a good decision and say, there's an aspect of it that's just a mystery. We just cannot comprehend it fully, and they leave it at that. And I think that at a certain point, you have to come to that conclusion. There's a point at which it's just unknown to us. It's incomprehensible. We are limited and finite. God is infinite. How can we expect to fully grasp the things that God is and the things that God does? You just can't. But it's not going to stop us from trying. And so there's going to be a lot of questions about, is Jesus fully God? Is he fully human? Is he something in between? And what is the relationship between divinity and humanity? What is the relationship between Christ and the Father? And all these things are going to come up again. And so in Alexandria, in Egypt, one of those Eastern churches, they're going to be a group that says, they're sometimes called Word Flesh Christianity. Jesus is lacking in some measure of his humanity. Jesus is God, fully God. They're going to have no problem saying that. But they're going to struggle with trying to explain how it is that he's also human. On the flip side, you're going to have the Antiochians, which are going to say, sometimes called Word-Man Christianity, which is Jesus was fully man. But the problem with that is they struggle to rectify his divinity. So you got two groups that are going to have kind of opposite views and opposite struggles, and they're going to have some debates that are going to take on, be the main feature of these Council of Ephesus and Council of Chalcedon. So there's going to be three phases of ways that this develops, this tension between the Alexandrians and the Antiochians. The first phase is going to come by a guy named Apollinarius, and Apollinarianism is going to be the first issue. 362, 381. Then after that issue, the kind of natural outgrowth from that is Nestorianism, which is going to be an issue, 381, 433. Then you're going to have the Council of Nicaea, or not Council of Nicaea, the Council of Ephesus, the first one. And then after Ephesus, you're going to have what's called the Eutychianism, which is going to then precipitate the Council of Chalcedon. So those are a lot of terms. And I know this is going to get confusing, just a heads up. This can be really hard to talk about, just to kind of wrap your head around. And just a disclaimer, I am in no way an expert on systematic theology. And so I'm going to do my best here, but there's a lot to these topics, and it gets really complicated. And if you read the actual primary sources, the things that these guys are saying, you have to read it incredibly slowly to try and piece together what they're saying, because they use very specific terms, and often the way they say things, to get the point across, they have to say the same thing like 3 or 4 different times in just nuanced different ways. And so it gets really hard to kind of communicate some of these things. And in fact, when we talk about Nestorius here in a minute, Nestorius is accused of things that he probably doesn't actually believe. And although it bears his name, Nestorianism, he probably wouldn't actually agree with most of what is considered Nestorianism. He just struggled to communicate what he actually believed. And I think sometimes we're going to fall into the same pit here. But I'm going to try and explain this, but just heads up. So Apollinarianism. Apollinarius, that is misspelled, of Laodicea. So 315, 392. Laodicea is over towards Ephesus area and the Lycus River Valley. It is going to be one of those Eastern churches. Apollinarius is going to take that Antiochian position of word flesh, that Jesus is fully divine, but yet lacking in some sort of his humanity, and he's going to take that to the absolute extreme. So what he is going to say is that in the incarnation, when the divine Logos, when the Word, right, John 1:1, when the Word becomes flesh, John 1:14, that the divine Logos, which is a spirit, is going to replace the spirit of a human Jesus. And so Jesus then is not going to be fully human because he's going to have a divine soul. That's different than you and I because we are fully human, but we possess a human soul, right? We are created. He's going to say, the divine Logos, it's fully divine, and he is going to, refute Arianism. He's not going to say that the Logos, that the second person, is a lesser being than the Father, but he's going to be accused of Arianism as well, even though he himself is against it. He's going to say that when Jesus enters into the world, at some point, his human nature, his human soul, is replaced with a divine soul, and so there's a problem here, and I hope you can see it, which is if Jesus lacks a human mind, a human soul, how is he fully human? And if Jesus did not assume the fullness of humanity, how can the fullness of humanity be redeemed? The idea, why did Jesus take on flesh? Was it, there is something about it that was necessary for the redemption process, right? Jesus is the bridge between God and humanity. And so to bridge that gap, he needs to be both. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but, how can Jesus redeem that which he is not? Jesus takes on flesh for the purpose of dying and being resurrected to redeem, right? The Bible talks about that very clearly. Hebrews talks about that very clearly. But if Jesus is not fully human, if it's only the mind that Jesus that is divine, then what about the rest? Is that redeemed? And so there's a guy by the name of Gregory of Nazianzus in his Epistle 101, not like 101 class, but his 101st epistle. He's going to write, that which is united to God is that which will be saved. If half of Adam fell, also half will be taken up and saved. But if all of Adam, all of his nature will be united to God, and all of it will be saved. And so he says, listen, Adam didn't just partially fall. If Adam fell, he fell. And if Adam fell in his whole being, Adam, the first man, right? He fell, then he's fully condemned in all his humanity. But if what God assumes, if God, what he takes on, if only that is what's saved, then you got a problem because only part of you is being saved. And that's a significant issue. What is not assumed is not saved, is the key terminology there. And so just a couple side notes. There's a big resurgence of Apollinarianism today. People call it Neo-Apollinarianism. You may have heard the name of William Lane Craig. He's a really famous Christian writer today. He's a Neo-Apollinarianist, and he's unapologetic about it. And so this is something that's really picking up steam in a lot of different corners of Christianity today. Another side note, you may or may not know Dr. Donnie DeBoard. He's one of my professors over at Freed, and I used some of his notes today. But he is from Pikeville, actually, just over the hill. He grew up there. He's in his, I think I might get in trouble if he watches this, but I think he's in his early 40s, maybe mid 40s. But he did his dissertation on, it's called A Chalcedonian Critique of Neo-Apollinarianism. And so this is his specialty. This is what he really specializes in. But anyway, this is something that's gaining prevalence. And so Apollinarianism, there's a lot more we could say about it, but the gist is Jesus, human body, divine mind, divine soul. And there's problems that stem from that. After Apollinarianism, there comes the second wave of issues called Nestorianism. And although it's called Nestorianism, it doesn't really get its start with Nestorian, and Nestorian kind of argues it, but he's not really trying to argue it, he's just poorly expressing himself. One of the first figures, most important guys, is a guy by the name of Diodore of Tarsus, 378-390. He is going to distinguish between the Son of God, which is the divine nature of Jesus, and the Son of David, which is the human nature of Jesus. And so Nestorians are going to be diphysitists, but they're going to take that really extreme, and they're going to say that there's no intermingling between these two. He's going to be followed by a guy, Theodore of Mopsuestia, I don't know how you say that, and he's going to say there's a complete distinction between the human and divine in Jesus. There's also such a unity of will and operation that is the result of one person. So what he's going to say is that since there's a union between the nature, there is not a union in the nature of Jesus, the human and the divine. They're two totally separate different things, or activity, the things that they do. Jesus, the flesh, eats. Jesus, the divine, the Logos, has no need for food, right? Jesus, the flesh, was crucified, but Jesus, the Logos, was not crucified. You can't crucify the Logos. Jesus, the flesh, was resurrected, but Jesus, the Logos, was not. And so there's going to be a distinction not only in the nature of them, their substance, their ousios, the word we've been using, but in the things that they do. Where there is unity is in their morality. And so they're both perfectly moral. And so this is going to be quite a problem. And so Jesus is a human who essentially became God, is what the Nestorians are going to say. And so where Nestorius really comes in, though, Nestorius of Constantinople, I really got to spell check this. My keynote doesn't spell check as well as my pages does, and so I miss some sometimes. But what he's going to do is he's going to be at the Council of Ephesus. He's going to play a big role, and he's going to have a lot of discussions with kind of his arch enemy, Cyril of Alexandria. But he is going to really question, if this is true, if there's a separation between Jesus, the human and Jesus the God, then what do we make of Mary? What is the deal with Mary? Is she the mother of a child with human nature, or is she the mother of a child with both a human and divine nature, with a divine nature? If she's the mother of a human child, well, then she should be called the Christotokos, the Christ bearer, the one who gives birth to Christ. And that's the position a historian is going to take. Others, like Cyril, who we'll talk about here in a second, he's going to say that Mary is not just the bearer of the human nature, but also the bearer of the divine nature. And he's going to call her Theotokos. Theos is the word God in Greek, and tokos is the word to bear. And so she's going to be the God bearer. You can see, though, how that might get people's feathers ruffled, right? If you're calling Mary a God bearer, that sounds pretty pagan. That sounds pretty polytheistic. Doesn't that make Mary then, some kind of goddess, some kind of, supernatural being in of herself? Gods beget gods. Humans, mortals, don't beget gods. Gods beget humans. And so what is Mary then? And in this time period, you're going to have the very beginnings of what's going to really develop later on. Some people call it Mariology, the study of Mary. And what it's going to be is increasing honor that's given to Mary and an elevation of Mary beyond what she had been receiving in the past. And, as eventually we know when we look at, some of our Catholic friends and other people, that this is going to get pretty out of hand here pretty soon. But there's going to already at this time an elevation of Mary. This doctrine of Theotokos is going to get developed into ultimately the perpetual virginity of Mary, the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception, by the way, is not talking about Jesus. It talks about Mary. It's this doctrine that Mary was born sinless and that Mary was sinless until Jesus, because inherited sin and all that. But anyway, that's going to get blown way out of proportion in the future. But Nestorius is really concerned with that terminology. He doesn't like the term God bearer. He's much more comfortable saying Christotokos. She's the Christ bearer. And so I think where Nestorian is I think agrees with perhaps, it's hard to say exactly, but from what I was reading today, I think that he agrees with the two natures. He just struggles to say it right. And as a result, he's going to be deemed a heretic. But you're then going to have the problem, which is if there's a clear distinction between the human and divine natures, how can it be said that the divine suffered or that God was crucified? It is significant when you think about the redemptive work of Christ to say that, Christ is the Son of God, God in the flesh who died for your sins. They're going to make a distinction between the human and the divine here. Jesus the God, Jesus the divine, Jesus the Logos, he didn't die for you. The flesh did. You can't kill God. You can't kill the Logos. The Logos can't suffer. And so they're going to have this distinction that's going to cause some pretty significant theological issues. And so, the question ultimately then is, if you have this distinction, then what does that say about our redemption? And so Cyril of Alexandria is going to argue that God is unchangeable in his nature. And I think that is correct. God is constant, always who he is, never changing. He's going to argue, though, that the incarnation is not a change of his nature, but a change in the circumstances. And so humanity is not a change in the nature of God, but it's going to be an extension of Christ's divinity, and it's going to be an addition to his nature. If I get that right, I may have misstated that, but it gets really confusing. You get a lot of really difficult terminologies and heavily nuanced sentences that you have to read 15 times. So you're going to then have the Council of Ephesus. This is called by Emperor Theodosius II, not the first. The first is the one that made Christianity mandatory. This is not him. And Valentinius III in Ephesus in 431. They're going to settle this issue, and that we're going to talk about Apollinarius and the Nestorius, and they're going to compromise. A compromise creed is going to be made. We're not going to read it because it's really, really long, all the stuff that they come up with. But essentially, it's going to say, guys, there are two natures. Cyril wanted them to say, there's just one nature, right? He takes it a little too far. But they're going to say there are two natures. Jesus is God. He is man. And there's both of those. And so Cyril's not going to be too happy. But at the same time, they're going to use the term God-bearer, Theotokos, against Nestorius. And so Nestorius isn't going to be happy. So nobody's happy. And things are just going to devolve from here. And so following the Council of Ephesus, you're going to have this Eutychianism, which is going to come up. Eutyches of Constantinople is a friend of Cyril, but he's going to take it even further. The Nestorians take the extreme position that Christ is two and distinct. He's going to say that they are one and overemphasize the oneness of Christ. And so he's going to say that there's one nature and that the divinity of Christ overwhelms the humanity, leaving only the divinity. And so then you have a problem. His famous line is, two natures before the union, but after it was one. And so he's going to give some lip service to, there's some humanity, but functionally, no. And so he's going to really take this to an extreme. And the problem here is that he removes humanity from Jesus, which is the whole point of the incarnation, that God took on flesh, and the Word, the Logos became flesh, and he's going to remove the flesh. And so that's a problem. And so Jesus must be truly man and truly God to bridge the gap between humanity and God. And I think this is what all of these keep coming back to. Humanity is distinct from God. Humans are unlike God, and God is unlike humans because we are created. He is uncreated. We're finite. He's eternal. He's infinite. And so there's this distinction, but what Jesus does is he assumes both already divinity, because he is divine, and then he assumes humanity, and he becomes both. And so he's the bridge between humanity and divinity that allows for redemption. And so you're going to have there it goes. So then you're going to have the Council of Chalcedon, which is, I have a lot of misspellings. I got to check this better next time, go through and correct this. In 451, the Council of Chalcedon's called, and Chalcedon is an area near Constantinople, and the issue is, let's settle these issues once and for all. This is getting out of hand. There's a very important letter. There's not, the bishops from all over the place come over to it. The Bishop of Rome is a guy by the name of Leo, Archbishop Leo. He does not come, but he does send a letter that's read and is important. They're going to come to some dogmatic conclusions, some doctrinal conclusions. And what they're going to conclude is that the Logos was made man and had two natures, which is diphysitism. You have both the humanity and the divinity. And if you talk about God or as Jesus as having one or the other, you're in the wrong. He's both. You have the hybrid Apollinarianism is rejected. He's not a human with a divine nature. He's not some, mixture. He's not like a demigod, like a Greek demigod or something. He's not some mixture of the two. That's wrong. He's not two separate natures that are totally unconnected, except for perhaps in their morality, whatever that means. That's rejected. Also, you have the over-merging, the oneness, the dominance of the divinity over the humanity. That's rejected. And so what they do affirm, though, is, you got one Jesus Christ, who is man, who is God, and the relationship's a mystery. So maybe a little bit of a cop-out, but I think that's the correct answer. How do you explain this? Well, I think at a certain point, it's just beyond comprehension. And you are, as a human, and your finite abilities to reason are just incapable of fully rectifying, I think the word fully is important, fully rectifying what has happened in the incarnation. And so Chalcedon is going to produce a creed, the Chalcedonian Creed. And I know this is a little bit long, but let's read this and look at some of the influential terms. I highlighted a couple of them. This is what it says. We then, following the Holy Fathers, as with one consent, teach men to confess one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, the same perfect in Godhead and also perfect in manhood, truly God and truly man. And that's significant. Of a reasonable soul and body, consubstantial with us, according to the manhood. Of the same substance as us humans, but also of the same substance as God, right? In all things like unto us, without sin, begotten before all ages by the Father according to the Godhead, and in these latter days for us and for our salvation, born of the Virgin Mary, the mother of God, Theotokos, according to the manhood, one and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, to be acknowledged in two natures, inconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, inseparably, the distinction of natures being by no means taken away by the union or the incarnation, but rather the property of each nature being preserved and concurring in one person and one substance, not parted or divided into two persons. So that's really dense language right there. But look at what they're saying. He assumes humanity, and it's unchangeable, it's indivisible, you can't separate them. They are, two natures in one person, both being preserved, one not overwhelming the other, but one and the same, the Son, the only begotten, God, the Word, the Lord Jesus Christ, as the prophets from the beginning have declared concerning him, and the Lord Jesus Christ himself taught us, and the creed of the Holy Fathers is handed down to us. And so, look at what there are a few of these things, right? He's not some hybrid. He's fully God, fully man. They're both preserved. They're, co-substantial. He shares this with us. He shares it with God. He's born, from his very beginning in the womb. Mary has got the Son of God in her womb, a human and divine natured being in her womb, and they're inseparable. They're the same. There's oneness and two-ness. So this is the kind of language that you have to sift through. Every line is incredibly thought through, and it's incredibly dense. And so it's not easy reading, but this is, I think, a good explanation. And I think they do about as good a job as you can do to talk about this. And so the Council of Chalcedon, they talk about some other things. The question at the beginning was, we've used the term Catholic quite a bit, and the word Catholic just means universal. I think, at least for me, when do you mark down when does the Catholic Church begin? I think what we see in Catholicism is very different than what we see in New Testament Christianity. I'm not comfortable calling Catholicism New Testament Christianity. I don't think you are either. But nevertheless, when does Catholicism begin? And I think if you've been following along with this class, it's not really an easy answer. Is it with the First Ecumenical Council? Is it with Nicaea in 325? A lot of people date it there. I think that might be a little bit too early. Is it the first time somebody uses the term Pope? Well, you got a problem with that because the first use of the word Pope is by Arius, and it's not even talking about the Bishop of Rome. It's talking about the Bishop of Alexandria, so probably not that. For me, I think the Council of Chalcedon is the best date to date the beginning of the Catholic Church. And the reason for that is part of what they do is they recognize the authority of the Roman bishop above the authority of the others. And they do that largely because of the apostolic succession, which we've talked about that before, the idea that they're teaching things and their authority is handed down generation to generation, bishop to bishop from the apostles. And certainly Rome has a good claim for apostolic succession, right? Peter dies there, Paul dies there. And so for a long time, that's Rome's primary claim to authority. And we've seen them try and overstep their bounds a few times. We saw that with the Paschal controversy and those sorts of things. But now they're citing Roman authority, not just because of Roman apostolic succession, but also because of its location. You've had this merger of church and state with Constantine. And the empire has moved from Rome to Constantinople, but Rome is essentially although it may not be the political capital, it's the heart capital of the Roman Empire. And so Rome is being held with extra high regard. And also, you begin to see a hierarchy of church sees that are recognized. You have the church at Rome is the preeminent church. And then second to it is the Church of Constantinople. Then you have the others of significance: Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem. These are the 5 primary churches, and there's a hierarchical structure between them. And especially moving forward from Chalcedon, and we'll talk about this a little bit for the rest of our time, there's going to become a patriarchal system of government that's recognized between these churches. And so autonomy or any real vision of it is kind of going by the wayside. We've now bound people by creed, and if you don't agree with these authoritative statements, then you're out. Part of what Chalcedon does is they say, listen, these other councils we've had, Nicaea, everybody pretty much was fine with Nicaea, although there's some discussion, but pretty much everybody adopted it. Chalcedon, a little bit less. But now they say, listen, Nicaea and Chalcedon and Constantinople and Ephesus, these are now binding. And if you don't adhere to this, you're out. You're not a part of the church. And so they anathematize people that are disagreeing with them. And so really you have now this firm establishment of orthodoxy. And it's not just an orthodoxy that's based on apostolic authority, but it's an orthodoxy that's based on the authority of bishops and traditions that are now beginning to take precedent. And so this is, I think, really the flipping moment, the turning moment between old Christianity and Catholicism. And so Pope Leo is the bishop at Rome. He's not there in person, but I think he becomes the first Catholic pope. Big C, big P, right? He's the first recognized, I think, Catholic pope. And the term pope had been used a little bit before, but now I think it really becomes big P. And so this is, I think, when you talk about, well, who's the first pope? This is who I say has become the first pope. Certainly there were bishops of Rome before him, and we talked about the monarchical or the monepiscopacy that develops early on, but this is taking it to a different level. And so one last, just look at this map again. You got Rome over there in the east, and or the west, and you got all these other major 4 seas over there in the west. I'm going to get that confused. Rome, the big C, is in the west, and the other 4 are over there in the east. And so post-Chalcedon, post-Chalcedon, Christological controversies are essentially done for the Western Church. They're happy, they're content. Rome is going to say, this is what we believe, and hold it with an iron fist. There's still going to be some lingering confusion and controversy going on between these churches over there in the East. And the division between the East and the West is going to keep growing. And it's not just geographical, and it's not going to just be linguistic, but now it's going to start really becoming theological as well. And so there's going to be this distinction that's going to really, really grow. And Rome's outsized authority, well, they're going to start exercising it. And this division is going to be, ultimately, when they split, is going to be where we end our class for this summer. So next week, we're going to talk about the church in the west and the east a little bit next week, and some of the distinctions that begin to emerge going on in the now Middle Ages. So thank you guys for watching. We'll be back next week.